Good morning, Al Ingles here at pressure-free.com. Subject today, fat stores and the stress response. I've been seeing this infomercial. Of course, things are targeted, and so I do all this talk about this kind of stuff. So of course, I'm going to probably see this. Maybe you don't see it, but it's an infomercial talking about an app that and the tagline is it's not your hormones, it's stress. And I just want to debunk that today because it's actually pretty incorrect to say that. It is hormonal. It's just not the hormones that people are thinking about, like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, androgens. Like it's not that. It's a stress hormone issue. So I'm going to start today by just sharing about, what is the role of stress, the stress response, and fat stores. And then I'll go into some of the other reasons why we store body fat in certain places on ourselves. There are four factors, and I've listed them up here. Kind of scribbled them this morning. So, uh, four fat, four reasons why fat will store in certain places in our body due to the stress response. So it's not stress or the challenges we're having in our lives. It's whether or not we trigger the stress response that determines whether or not we're building fat. You'll see some people who are under a great deal of stress, but they aren't building fat stores. And also, if a person is really thin, they may be developing these fat stores, but it's not really showing up the way it might in someone else. So we're very there's so many genetic predispositions to how we store fat. Again, I'm going to talk about that after we dig into this. So here are the four factors. When we trigger the first flood of stress hormones, you could call them stress chemicals. They are part of the endocrine system. That's why they're called hormones. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. When that first flood of hormones goes out, one of its things it does is it wicks fat and glucose out of our neurons in our extremities, which is why your hands might get sweaty and cold, your feet might get cold, and you move into brain fog, like it's hard to make decisions. You're reactive, like literally your brain is depowering, the outer brain is depowering, but we're wicking fat and glucose out of those cells. One neurobiologist that I followed back in the 2010s, 25th through 2015, he says it's like stacking all your neurons on the edge of a cliff, and the slightest change in blood pressure is killing a lot of them. So of course our blood pressure jacks when we go into fight or flight as well. So this fat and glucose comes into the bloodstream and it comes to the center of our body. So we have a massive amount of energy to fight or run away. You feel that jolt when you go into fight or flight, like you're just ready to just pick up the car off the toddler, like you can do superhuman things because you've got all this fat and glucose in your bloodstream. So it comes to the center, but if we're just sitting still or driving, we're not moving so much, we're not violently fighting or run away. The fat stores in our abdomens, and it stores in a fatty hump at the top of the spine at the base of the brainstem. My hypothesis for why it stores there is because our brain is what, 80% fat, something like that. It needs a lot of fat to operate. And so that fat store starts because if there's a thought, if we go into fight or flight, the body thinks, or what's happened for millennia is we might be stuck in a cave and we can't get to food. So we need these fat stores in our abdomen to serve all of our parts of our body, our processes that are going to keep us alive. And we need this fat store here so we can think, so our brain can work, so our brain can do everything it does in a millisecond every day to keep us alive. So that's its reason for bringing this fat and glucose here to the center of the body. But there's three other factors that really come into play. The digestive process, beginning with your saliva ducts. So you might have dry mouth. If you feel like you have a lot of dry mouth, you're probably triggering the stress response. If you have a lot of mouth sores, like canker sores, so the saliva ducts shut off because that's a whole part of your digestive system. That's where we first start to digest food. So that is going to be shut down somewhat. And so our entire digestive system slows down or stops because, again, we want all our energy to fight or run away to protect ourselves. So that becomes an issue, which is why sometimes people wake up after, 12 hours of not eating, but they're not hungry. If you wake up and you trigger the stress response, you may not feel like eating because your belly feels weird. I've run into so many parents. I remember growing up too, there were kids who woke up every morning and they're like, I don't want to go to school. I have a stomach ache. Take them to the doctor and they say, well, it's psychosomatic. There's nothing wrong. Well, yes, there's something wrong. They're triggering the stress response when they first wake up. So their stomach feels weird. So if you ever feel a lot of nausea, if you feel just uncomfortable in your belly, that's probably a clue that you've triggered the stress response. So our digestion slows. Number three, our metabolism, our entire metabolism processes slow down. So our thyroid gets very confused with the stress response. It will become overactive, underactive. It does all kinds of crazy stuff because all this, like in order for the stress response to work, for us to be in that state where we can violently fight and run away, the normal processes have to shut down somewhat. It all makes sense if you think about it. We need all this energy to fight, to run away. So anything that's going to take more energy, like our brains take a ton of energy to operate. We're going to slow down these processes in order to save ourselves, basically. And then the last is that after that first flood of hormones goes out, we've gone into fight or flight, we've done the fight, we've done the things. Then later, a second flood of hormones goes out. These are glucocorticoids. People talk about cortisol a lot. You can call this the cortisol flood, if you will. It's hydrocortisone and cortisone. These glucocorticoids go out, and one of their purposes, they have great purposes, by the way. You don't want to just lower cortisol, like take these gummies or whatever people are doing to lower cortisol. Honestly, if you've released the first flood of hormones, you need cortisol to get the salt, sugar, water content of your neurons, of your brain cells, and your extremities, get that back to normal. Now fat can transport in and out and you are powered back up. But you've got to get back to homeostasis. And that's what the glucocorticoids do. That's what cortisol does. It's a very important little hormone. And all this talk about suppressing it is not a good idea. What we need to do is not release the first flood. Then the second flood doesn't go out in this overabundance. It works naturally in our body to wake us up every morning. So we're messing with our natural systems when we go into fight or flight. Our body is very, very perfectly designed when we work it well. So second flood goes out. One of its side effects, though, is that when it hits, again, it's right in the bloodstream. So when it hits the new fats, the fat that we're developing in the center of our body and back here, it plumps up the fat cells. It makes them bigger. Again, the whole purpose is that we might not be able to get to food. We need to store fat so that we can survive. So you'll hear that a lot, that we're storing fat to survive in the stress response or when we're stressed. Again, it's whether or not we're triggering the stress response that's doing all this. You could have a lot of stressors going on, but be very pressure free and sail through it without these massive amount of hormones releasing in your body. That is the clue. That is the key to a pressure free life. And that's what I teach people to do, is not overreact no matter what these stressors are, even the big ones, but the small ones. Usually the things that people trigger over first thing in the morning are small. Oh no, I burnt the toast. Oh, we're running late. All these little things that are causing people to trigger the stress response. So those are the four things that happen in fight or flight when we trigger this massive amount of hormones, stress hormones to be exact. Now let's talk about a few other ways, or why do we store body fat in different areas? Like some people store it down in their butt, their hips, their legs. Other people know it's more up in the front. You think of that kind of beer belly look. Some people store a lot of fat more up in here. Why do we store fat in certain places? There's a lot of science on this. These are just kind of extrapolations from some things that I've read. But the first is like about half of where we store fat is genetically based. So if you look at yourself and think, why do I store fat like in my lower body? But then you look back through time, you'll probably see some relatives that stored fat in the lower part of their body. I don't have that. Like if I looked at my mother and my grandmothers, like they didn't have that. storage in the lower, but I have friends who do, so I see that difference. Also, when we're releasing a lot of, for females, when we're releasing a lot of estrogen, we will build more fat in that lower part of the body, the thighs, the hips, because that's actually a storage of fat necessary for feeding our young, for breastfeeding. We'll store fat there. And so I think that's really interesting. And then as estrogen wanes, so we have less of it over time, sometimes those fat stores diminish, and now it's more up into the belly area. So you'll see changes over time. And if you're on hormone therapy, you'll see changes too. You might see body changes too with where you're storing fat based on the hormones that you're using and getting, if you're doing any sort of hormone therapy. Oh, you know what I just realized? Did I do this whole thing with the headset plugged in? And do you even hear this? Oh, that's funny. But I'm gonna pause. It is almost 8:30. I just might have to redo this whole thing. I wish you a great pressure-free day. Bye.